Hello and welcome to the Kim Iverson Show. So, are Democrats quietly preparing to boot Biden? Well, we're seeing more and more signs that this may be the case. Gavin Newsom, who has denied he's preparing to run, did something similar to Ron DeSantis before DeSantis had announced he was running for president. He took a foreign trip to Israel. Now, not only did Newsom visit Israel, he went to Beijing and had a formal sit-down meeting with Xi Jinping himself. Take a look at what Gavin Newsom had to say during this meeting.
Well, I appreciate that, Mr. President, particularly the relationship to our subnational engagement. Today, 2 million Chinese Americans live in the state of California. We truly are the gateway to China. Respect in the spirit of figuring out a way to define the terms of our future, one of mutuality, one where we benefit the Commonwealth. I don't think there's a more essential relationship. There will not be one more essential than the relationship we formed together, the United States and China, in our lifetimes.
So that's very interesting that he's saying that. A lot of people have been up in arms over his saying that, you know, we're going to be together forever on this. He also said that in an interview with CNN. He said divorce with China is not an option. A lot of GOP war hawks want to posture against China. Even a lot of Democrats had been ruffling China's feathers. If you remember Nancy Pelosi going on a trip to Taiwan. So Gavin Newsom says divorce with China is not an option. He makes that statement. Let's talk about first, before we go back into what he said with Xi Jinping. Well, with Xi Jinping, he was there to actually talk about climate change. And he's there on a week-long trip to do a variety of things in China and a variety of meetings. But this is actually a pretty big and historic meeting. Gavin Newsom is a governor of the state of California. He's not the president of the United States, but this is the type of trip a president takes. So is Gavin Newsom preparing to potentially move Biden aside and move himself in? That is the big question. He did say when he went on his trip to Israel, he met with some of the family members of people who had been injured and people who had been killed. He said that he saw a lot of footage, much of the footage that many of us have already seen on social media, much of which the same footage that was shown to the select group of 100 or 200 journalists. Again, a lot of that footage came from social media. There was some of it that wasn't, but apparently Gavin Newsom was shown that footage. So he had a lot of sympathy, and he was saying that, there's a lot of Californian Israelis, and so he was showing his support in that way. But it's a historic trip. It's a trip that you make if you're preparing to run for president. I mean, clearly he is doing this foreign policy tour like, hey, how will I do in Israel? Got to show that support. That's what Ron DeSantis did. He took his trip to Israel right before he announced that he's running for president. He said, look, I'm on your side. Gavin Newsom doing the exact same thing, taking a trip to Israel. And he says, well, it's because there's another interesting twist to this one, too. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I just thought about this. But Kathy Hochul, the governor of New York, also took a recent trip to Israel. And I'm curious if Gavin Newsom ends up being the presidential candidate. I wonder if Kathy ends up being the vice. Because that's the big question, is what are they going to do with Kamala? You can't have, well, typically, traditionally, the tradition holds that two people from the same state don't run on that ticket, on the presidential ticket, that you try to get somebody from a different part of the country, and oftentimes somebody that has different viewpoints from you, that can kind of bring in a different base. And I think with Gavin Newsom being a white man, and you know how Democrats feel about that, him being a white man, they're going to definitely want a woman to be his running mate. And interestingly, Kathy Hochul also just took an international trip to Israel. So that is maybe the telltale sign that that will be the incoming ticket, that's who's going to be replacing Kamala Harris. We'll see. We're going to see. But clearly, this is the type of trip you make when you're about to be running for president. Now, the question is why. I think many of us already have answers to this, but the question is, why would they want to do this? Why would they be why would Democrats want to get rid of a sitting president in favor of somebody like Gavin Newsom? Is it because of his age and his declining mental capacities, which obviously many of us are seeing, and it's very worrisome for a lot of people. And the Democratic voters are very worried about that. Um, they're worried that maybe in the next, if Biden wins in 2024, his office term starts again in 2025, right? He's there until 2028. A lot of years from now, he could end up pulling a Mitch McConnell where, he just suddenly freezes, doesn't remember things, or a Dianne Feinstein where it's elder abuse to have this person continue to be in office and you just have them there as a puppet to further your agenda, your political agenda. So maybe they're worried that Biden would become the next Mitch McConnell or the next Dianne Feinstein. Maybe they're worried about his failed policies. I mean, pretty much everything they've done, it has been unsuccessful, from the pulling out of Afghanistan in a disastrous way, implementing a lot of mandates on Americans that ended up being completely useless and in some cases harmful. And people lost their jobs, and it was like, for what? The vaccines don't stop the spread. We know that. So, but they mandated it anyway. So he's got these failed policies. He's got a border issue, major border crises. He's not doing well. He's not doing well. And they know that if they run him against Donald Trump, who's likely the GOP nominee, he's going to lose. There's no way you can fudge that. I mean, he's just going to lose. So you could try, if there is some sort of voting conspiracy, let's say, like if there is a chance for things to be manipulated, let's just say, you couldn't do that with Biden there. No one's going to buy if Biden suddenly somehow miraculously beats Donald Trump. No one's going to buy that. But Gavin Newsom, maybe you could get away with that, even if he maybe didn't do as well as they claim. You could maybe fudge that up a bit to where Gavin Newsom, maybe it would be believable. They could say, well, people just really didn't like Trump this time. Again, they just really didn't like Trump. They prefer Gavin Newsom. It'd still be hard for me to believe, as somebody living in California, knowing how Californians feel about Gavin Newsom. I mean, we recalled the guy, but they don't have anybody. Democrats are scrambling. They don't have anybody. And they've got a sitting president who has now, look at this, his approval ratings have plummeted to record low. According to Newsweek, President Joe Biden's job approval rating among Democrats dropped by 11 percentage points in the past month, for the worst assessment among his own party since he took office, according to the Gallup poll that was just released on Thursday. The survey found Biden's current it was just released today. The survey found Biden's current approval rating among Democrats is 75%, a double-digit drop from September's 86%. The Gallup poll also recorded his overall approval rating at, get this, 37%. Oh, that's bad. A decline from last month's 41%, which was already bad, but to hit those 30s, yeah, they're looking to get rid of him. His overall rating had previously dipped to as low as 37% only once before, when it hit that mark in April. So, yeah, he's not going to win again. It would take a miracle. And I don't think they could claim that people just hate Trump that much. They can't say, well, people just really don't like Trump, and that is how Biden won again. No one's going to buy that. Because like Bill Clinton said, it's the economy, stupid. The economy is crap. So there's no way Joe Biden is going to win. And Democrats know this, so they are trying to figure out how are they going to get him to step aside. Plus, there's all these corruption investigations into him, and more evidence, increasing evidence that shows that the Biden family, which he has been in politics his entire life, how has he made millions of dollars? How has his family made millions of dollars in a life of supposed public service? And so there's a lot of questions about a lot of things when it comes to Biden, and that's only going to get worse. He's got this impeachment on him. So I think Democrats are looking to make this trade. The big question is, when will they make this trade? And then, of course, who will be the vice president when they make that trade? So will it be Kamala Harris, or will it be like a Kathy Hochul, or will it be somebody even like Amy Klobuchar? I would think that they would maybe go with a Klobuchar, because she's seen as really moderate, really in the middle. But, the vice, I don't think they'll just put in whoever they want, just like they did with Kamala. So the big question is, when are they going to make this big trade? Will they swap him before the primary, or will they swap him after the primary? Those are the questions. Now, I think they're going to swap him after the primary. I think, or mid primary. What they've done is they've effectively ensured that there is no primary, right? They shoved Robert F. Kennedy Jr. aside. They made him. They were smearing him. They said there's not going to be any debates. They made these new rule changes that if you campaign in New Hampshire or Nevada or Iowa before South Carolina, then your name isn't. You're not going to be on the ballot. All of these things that they're doing to limit democracy to ensure that there is no primary. And this is one of the reasons why they're doing this, is so that they can make the swap, because they don't want to end up with, they're afraid of a Trump-like takeover. They want to control the Democratic Party. They want to control the people, and they want to ensure that we're not going to end up with an anti-establishment candidate who's anti-war. That is what they will not tolerate. So, and they've made this clear. They've made this abundantly clear. So they've limited the primary. They've basically essentially said we're not even having one. Thanks, Marianne Williamson. She's like the only one running against Joe Biden. Best of luck to her. But of course, they're not going to let her. They're not going to. It's just it's meaningless, unfortunately. And then Biden ends up, it's the only person really running. It's a non-starter. He gets the nomination, and then they do the 1-2 switcheroo at the convention. That's when I think they're going to do it, because if they do it during the primary, if Gavin Newsom announces, all right, yes, I'm running for president, and it's during the primary, then he has to actually run for president. And then people actually have to vote for him. And a lot of people will not vote for him. And then you're going to get the RFK Jr. saying, wait a minute, what? Now you guys are going to have a primary after you made all these rules that made it to where you weren't going to have a primary, and you said you weren't going to do debates, and now suddenly you're going to have a primary. That wouldn't look good. Not that they care about looking good to the voting population, but it wouldn't look good. And people would start to say, although I don't know why they think they could do it at the convention without the voters saying, So now you just foisted this person on us, and we didn't even have a primary. But I think that is what they're going to do. And I think they know that their hardcore voting base will just say, okay, you know what's best, Democratic Party, so we will do what you want us to do. And if you want us to support Gavin Newsom because the alternative is the demagogue Donald Trump, then we will do whatever we need to do, because now is not the time to question democracy. Now is not the time to even have democracy. We got to ensure that we don't have Donald Trump. So they've been able to squash any sort of populist uprising, much of what took over the Republican Party. They're parading Gavin Newsom around right in front of us and essentially setting him up. He's denied, I'm not looking to be president. Although, while he was in Israel on his trip, he did joke around. He claims it was a joke, but he did say, I wish I was president. He said that, I wish I was president. So Freudian slip. But this type of thing, what is going on right here with this populist anti-war uprising, this takes us back to the 1968 Democratic primary. And this is when the way they eliminated that Robert Kennedy was, he was assassinated. So he was definitely not an option at that point. And then the guy who did win the actual primaries when they had them was Eugene McCarthy, and he was an anti-war candidate. Him and Kennedy were both against the Vietnam War. But even though Kennedy was the popular candidate, and then he was no longer available for obvious reasons, and then Eugene McCarthy was available, and voters voted for the anti-war candidate, what did they do at the Democratic convention that pissed everybody off and caused riots? Oh, they just put in their guy. Didn't even have him run. Hubert Humphreys, didn't even have him run. And they said, here's the guy. Here's the guy. So what he did was he played by their rules, because the Democratic Party has delegates and superdelegates, and he played by their rules, and he basically campaigned to the delegates and won the nomination by getting the delegates to vote for him. Gavin Newsom can do the exact same thing, because the rules haven't changed. So Gavin Newsom, all he has to do when it comes time to the convention is he pleads to the delegates and the superdelegates and says, unfortunately, Joe Biden is retiring. And he said at one point, they'll drag up some old statements from Joe Biden that he made before he was before, while he was running for president the first time, saying, "No, I'll only do one term." Then he'll say, "Guess what? I'm keeping my promise. I'm only doing one term. Oh, aren't I just this noble character? And I kept my promise." And then Gavin Newsom just has to win the delegates. That's it. And then they crown him. They crown him. No votes, just like Hubert Humphreys, just like 1968. And they'll do the same thing to this Robert F. Kennedy that they did to the other. Well, not as extreme. And I'm not, making any accusations necessarily. I'm just saying he wasn't available one way or the other. And that's exactly what's happened this time with this Kennedy. And instead, they're just going to put in their guy and everybody's just going to have to accept it. And the Democrats they will just gobble this up. And you know what it'll do? It is their way of squashing any sort of anti-war movement, any sort of populist movement. Because when would the next Democrat primary be at that point? I mean, if Gavin Newsom gets the nomination and then he somehow miraculously wins and they say, well, it's because everybody just really hated Donald Trump that badly and we had a bunch of mail-in votes and, whatever that scenario is, okay? When would be the next time we even have a Democratic primary? It would be 2032, right? Right, so we've got 2024 and then 2020. Yeah, 2032, they would be maybe having the next Democrat primary. But they don't even have to do it then. What they could do is they could say Gavin Newsom served his 2 terms as president, and his vice is next. They'll pull a Hillary Clinton. It's her turn. It's her turn. Whoever that her is, Kathy Hochul. Her turn. It's her turn. Everybody step aside. Everybody get out of the way. We've already got our person. And this could continue until they ensure that there is no more populist sentiment, no more anti-war sentiment, just like they did throughout the 70s when they squashed any hope by, the next election around. Who was the nominee in 1972? Was it McGovern? And then what did they do? Democrats for Nixon. They campaigned for. They were like, oh, we can't have this anti-war guy. We've got to go now. Nixon. Democrats for Nixon. It's just insane what they'll do, the level they'll go to keep us in line. They don't want any anti-establishment uprising. They don't want any populist movements. They don't want any anti-war movements. That's for damn sure. And so they force feed us. They force feed us people who are clearly unpopular. And they say, take this and swallow it. And that is, you don't get a choice. You thought you lived in a democracy? Oh, cute. That is so cute that you thought that. All right, guys, let me tell you about this great product from Brickhouse Nutrition called Lean. This is a really excellent supplement. It's all natural, and this is going to help shed those pandemic pounds off of your body. Lean is this awesome product that it helps you with curbing your appetite. You're going to need to curb your appetite when you're, if you want to lose weight. It also is going to help metabolize your fat that's already on your body. So if you've got extra weight, then when you're not eating as much because your appetite is curbed, then the fat on your body is going to be used to give you that energy, and you're going to eat that fat. That's why the fat's there, right? We gain weight because our body says, I might need this later for some time for some energy. And so this is the time to start doing that. And then also what it's going to do is it's going to lower your blood sugar, and that's going to help your body not store fat as easily as it does when we've got insulin resistance going on. So this is a really awesome product. It is all natural supplement. It is, but it's high quality and it really does work. Go and get yourself 15% off your order by going to takelean.com and use promo code Kim15 for 15% off of your first order. Again, that is takelean.com, promo code Kim15 for 15% off your first order. And those links are down below. Well, as Gavin Newsom is telling us, divorce is not an option with China. Joe Biden is issuing them a warning that if they cross the line with the Philippines, I know you thought it was just Taiwan. Well, if they cross the line with the Philippines, we're going to war. Watch this.
National rules of the road, including freedom of navigation. Just this past week, the PRC vessels acted dangerously and unlawfully as our Philippine friends conducted a routine resupply mission within their own exclusive economic zone in the South China Sea. I want to be clear. I want to be very clear. The United States defense commitment to the Philippines is ironclad. The United States defense agreement with the Philippines is ironclad. Any attack on the Filipino aircraft vessels or armed forces will invoke our mutual defense treaty with the Philippines. And
So yeah, that's some pretty interesting warmongery rhetoric coming from him. It sounds a lot like the GOP. You've got on one hand Newsom swooping in, clearly not looking for war with China. And by the way, I should mention that Democrat Chuck Schumer was also just recently in China at the beginning of the month, along with a few other senators. They say it was a bipartisan panel, so at least there were some Republicans there. But for the most part, we've just heard a lot of warmongery rhetoric about China, is particularly coming from the GOP. And in fact, the GOP has already shown, or conservatives, I should say, have already shown that they're not happy about Newsom's change and Chuck Schumer also trying to rebuild relationships with China after Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan, after Speaker Kevin McCarthy's visit to Taiwan. People are getting pretty nervous, and now we're seeing stuff go. We're in a proxy war with Russia in Ukraine. We've got ramped up potential war going on in the Middle East, and that might end up with actual American boots on the ground. We're used to sending American boots to the Middle East, so I'm sure they're thinking, well, we got to do it to save Israel this time around, which may be the only actual war over there that would rile up Americans enough to send boots on the ground. And that makes people very nervous because China now is at play. And that is something that we didn't have during the first Gulf War or the second War on Terror. But this time China's in place. So there might be some increased worry, increased tension. And now you've got Democrats trying to chill things out and change their tune. Conservatives, on the other hand, are still warmongering. Look at this tweet. This is from the Washington Examiner saying Newsom defends failure to address human rights abuses with China's Xi Jinping. So they want to talk about the human rights abuses. They want to talk about the Uyghurs. That's what Washington Examiner, which is a conservative outlet, that's what they want Gavin Newsom to have talked about, but he failed to address human rights abuses with Xi Jinping. Also, here's another tweet. This is from James T. Quinn, who is I believe he's with the National Review. Let me just double check where he's with the National Review, which is also a conservative outlet. And he said the press release from Governor Newsom's team today also does not make clear if Newsom raised human rights, American detainees, and fentanyl directly with Xi or with or only with lower level officials. So again, saying, why didn't you talk to them about all the crap they're doing? Which, hey, listen, you watching, you might feel like, yeah, confront them. But we're going to get into that a little bit later, whether or not that is a good idea. I think that cooling it down, cooling the rhetoric, not getting us into a war with China is probably the smart move. And we saw with the GOP Trump, he ramped up a lot of rhetoric against China. I don't think he was going to try to get us into a hot war with China. I'm not sure if he was interested in any sort of, we're going to go and defend Taiwan and put boots on the ground. I don't think Trump is really interested in starting any new wars, but he did initiate the trade war with China. But if you remember, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, under Trump, on his last day in office, actually declared that China was committing ongoing genocide. He actually used that word genocide against the Uyghurs. So that's pretty heavy rhetoric right there coming from Mike Pompeo. Now, China, thinking about war, going to war with China. So you've got the conservatives, you've got GOP, Mike Pompeo's of the world, Nikki Haley's of the world, really wanting to ramp up rhetoric with going to war with China. This is where I get really nervous because, Democrats want to have a war with Russia, clearly. I mean, they're all in on Ukraine. They want us to continue funding the war in Ukraine. But the GOP, it's like, okay, you could either choose Democrats who want this ongoing war with Russia, or you could choose the GOP, which many of them want war with China. Well, war with China, we're feeling it already, the war with Ukraine. The war with China would be a very different animal. China is the one country that could make us feel real economic pain. With Russia, we just see what rising gas prices, and of course, that sucks, and that causes rising food prices, and it causes it raises the price of goods because of the increased transport fees and increased utilities. But China's a different animal. During the pandemic, we saw what happens when the supply chain is disrupted: empty shelves, lack of goods. America is a consumer nation and not at all accustomed to rationing the way China and even Russia are. Okay, they have been poor. They know what that's like. People in their 30s right now in Russia remember what it was like to stand in a line for hours to get milk when they were little kids. They remember that. China's just recently, rapidly gotten out of poverty. Okay, so their generations, their parents, the youth, even maybe not the young people in Russia and China, but a pretty good size of their population understands what it's like to ration. We here in America, we would go crazy. I mean, whoever is in the Oval Office would be booted immediately. If this got to this point where we are looking at the way it was during the pandemic, you couldn't get toilet paper, the shelves were empty, the supply chains were blocked up. It just, I mean, Americans can complain about endless war, wasting tax dollars, but those wars really haven't affected us here at home. Not really. I mean, yes, rising gas prices. We see this. This also, of course, causes some inflation, but not empty shelves. Now, politicians have learned that as long as young American men aren't coming home in boxes, Americans can sustain war indefinitely. A little bit of pain, we could put up with it. They even said to us when they were going into this war with Russia, they said, well, we're at war, so we've got to, take one for the team, even though they claim we weren't at war, but then they admitted we were at war. And so look at what the Ukrainians have to deal with. So if you just have a few dollars added to your gallon of gas, like, get over it, you complainer. That's the way they approached it. But what America, and you know what, we've been doing it. We're not doing it well. Biden's approval ratings are low. Americans are not happy, but I'll tell you what Americans will not sustain. Americans will not sustain empty shelves. We just cannot do it. We cannot. China could take over every American business and factory in China. They have the ability to do that. That's why it is they run their country a certain way, and it's so that the government can do that. Here in the United States, we have different laws, different rules. But in China, any business there is partly run by the government. I mean, the government could take it over at any time. So China could also cut us off from their imports. I mean, could you imagine? We get everything is made in China. Everything is made in China. So this would be, similar to like what Israel's doing by cutting off the Gazans. And they're claiming it's because, well, they're at war. So why would they provide them with water, electricity, cell phone towers? They could shut it all off, and they've been doing that. Now, China wouldn't be able to do exactly those things to us. They wouldn't be able to cut off our water or our food, maybe a bit. They own a lot of the farms, but of course, I think if they were to confiscate the American factories, the government would be able to make a case to confiscate the farms. Not really sure. We have different laws here in America. We have a different constitution, so it would be different here. Maybe they would enact some wartime rule. I would think they would. I would hope they would, actually, in a case like that. I mean, we got to eat. But they could, they could blockade us. I mean, they really could. They could just block us from having any goods imported into the country. They could do this, and it would crumple us. It would crumple us to go without access to consumer goods. We are a consumer society. Now, some say China would never do this because it would only hurt them. They would just hurt themselves. But again, they're used to scarcity, and they could improvise. The last time Americans really needed to ration was, several generations ago during the Great Depression, I think is the last time we had to do that. So we do not remember. I mean, this was my grandmother, when she was young, was living in the Great Depression, but it was my great. So even younger generations, it's their great, and great. I mean, these are generations ago that actually had to ration here in the United States. We are so spoiled, and we are used to consumer goods. So war with China could do to us what we've done to countless countries with our debilitating sanctions. Think about Venezuela. Think about Iran. And anybody who wants to wage war with China. I mean, it would be political suicide to go to war with China. Nikki Haley, Mike Pompeo, this would be political suicide. But that doesn't seem to deter the war rhetoric. They just keep ramping it up. And I don't know if they're serious, if they're doing it because they know the voting base wants to hear that, which is sad. That's sad. That voters just go for war rhetoric. If you are going to give me war rhetoric, then I'm going to vote for you. And maybe that is the human condition. So maybe they're doing it just to get the votes, or maybe they mean it, which is extremely, extremely dangerous. And some of these political leaders seem to understand that. They understand that divorce from China is not an option, as Gavin Newsom said, and he's right on that. Now, I don't think Gavin Newsom's right very often, but he is right on that. He is also right, and these other Democrats who've gone to meet and tried to repair the relationship with China, they're right. We cannot be going in this direction with going into an actual World War III with China. And I don't know if a lot of people in the GOP, as much as they talk about not going to war with Russia, I don't know if they really, really, truly understand that war with China would be much, much worse. We cannot sustain that kind of war. So with Gavin Newsom now having met with China, we'll see how the GOP candidates posture about this. I mean, they might posture around saying, well, he met with a dictator who commits human rights abuses. And, that could be the way that they end up spinning this, or they might ignore it. That would be, I think, the smart thing to do, is not say anything about it at all. Because I don't think that they should be ramping up war rhetoric against China. We've already got too much going on when it comes to war, potential war. We really don't need one more. We don't need to escalate. So even though we've already seen this rhetoric a bit coming from the conservative outlets, we'll just see how the candidates end up actually reacting to this. And the GOP, if they do come out and they say, well, like the Washington Examiner, like the National Review, saying, well, he didn't ask them about human rights abuses. Meanwhile, they're all in on Israel, right? They just say Xi Jinping is committing a genocide against the Uyghurs. And but we stand with Israel no matter what, even though we see countless images, countless photos, countless videos, countless eyewitnesses. We've had a member of our own Congress have family killed in the Middle East, in Gaza, and yet it's all in on Israel. But China is committing those human rights abuses. So at least Newsom's consistent on this issue. He's when he went to Israel, he did say that they are going to be sending aid into Gaza, that California is sending aid to Gaza as well as to Israel. So he's not, I think, diminishing, he's not like blind to the fact that there's a human rights crisis going on, a catastrophe in Gaza, but certainly he made it clear he stands with Israel. And when it comes to China, he actually said, I think, do we have a video of Gavin Newsom, or did we not get that video of Newsom? If we have it, we'll just play it. But he did say, he was pressed on this. He was pressed on, why didn't you talk to China about the human rights abuses? Why didn't you press Xi Jinping on that? And he said, I can't be everything to everyone, is what he said. I think we just had kind of a low quality recording on that, so we're just not going to play that to you. But so he's kind of consistent on both, like, well, that happens. Well, and we just got to stick with Israel and stick with China. And at least he's got that consistent, unlike the GOP, which they're sitting there saying, I stand with Israel and they've just got to wipe out Hamas. And if that takes civilians with them, then that's Hamas's fault. And then they point at China and say, but you're committing a genocide. And, we're looking at you. So that's kind of what's going on. The hypocrisy, You guys know I do not like hypocrisy at all. Let's now talk about China and the Uyghurs. Let's get into this, and let's get into the differences in how China has been handling Islamic jihadist groups. Now, first of all, however you may feel about this, so you may feel sick about China and what is going on with the Uyghurs. You might really think that there is this horrible, horrible thing going on. I want to first start off this part of this show, this part of the conversation, by asking you, or just ask yourself if you've actually seen any real evidence of a genocide in China. Now, I know you've heard of it. And I know every outlet has told this to you. I know that everyone has told you there is a genocide going on in China, that the Uyghurs are being suppressed, that they're being put in concentration camps, right? But I want you to really think about, what have you seen? What have you seen? Because we haven't really been shown any actual concrete evidence, only images of buildings. They show us these satellite images of buildings and they say, these are concentration camps. These are where they're holding the Uyghurs. We see pictures of prisoners. There's circulating online. You've seen the hundreds of, or several tens of prisoners that are sitting there all with the shaved heads and their jumpsuits. And you see these large groups of men and they're saying these are people in concentration camps. Right? So you've seen these pictures, but I want you to really ask yourself, have you seen any actual visual evidence? Can you point to any actual visual evidence when you believe you believe that there's a genocide and something really awful going on and human rights abuses going on in China? So unlike Gaza and the Palestinians, where you have seen countless images, photos, videos, many of us have actually been there and experienced the occupation. I've been there myself. I've seen it myself. So we actually have visual evidence of what is going on in Israel. You've seen that with yourself, whether or not, now you may agree with Israel, right? You may think that the civilian casualties are Hamas's fault, or you may think the occupation is because Palestinians kept flubbing the peace deals. Whatever it is, whatever you may think about why it's happening, people aren't denying that it's happening. And that is because we can see it. So with the notion that there's this Uyghur genocide, what evidence have we actually seen besides what we've been told? And then if we don't agree and we say, yeah, but I haven't seen any evidence of this, a lot of us were often treated with disdain, and it's like we're Holocaust deniers. And we're going to go deeper into this and the evidence and the investigations done by various outlets and how that narrative continues to change. But I just want you to keep this in mind as we continue. Think about the evidence and then say, if you haven't seen any evidence, maybe stop and actually question this narrative. You might hate China, and so you might have a propensity to want to believe that there's something really horrendous going on, and I totally get that. But unless you've seen it, just kind of think about that for just a minute. So let's talk about what I have in my research and the research of many others, what actually is going on. Let's talk about first the history of terrorism and the Uyghurs and how the United States has shifted the tune towards China on this, and how the Uyghurs were radicalized, how they became a hotbed of recruitment, and how they attacked people in China coming home from a lot of the fighters fought with Al-Qaeda, a lot of the fighters fought with the Taliban, a lot of them fight with ISIS, and then they come back to China and they've committed some acts of terrorism in China. So China has an undeniable, and nobody in the State Department, nobody in the foreign policy think tanks deny the fact that China has an extremist problem, that they've got an ISIS jihadist ideology problem amongst the Uyghurs in their population. I want you to take, first of all, before I show you some of the old articles on this, back in 2002, the United States actually pressured China. So this was when we were in our war on terror. We were really hot on this. And the United States actually pressured China and said, you've got a terrorism problem. You've got a extremist jihadi problem going on in your Xinjiang region. And we are going to label that group. It was, they had a name for it. And they said, we're labeling them as a terrorist organization. And we are pressuring you to fight the war on terror. At that point in the early 2000s, going all the way up until about 2016, right until China announced their Belt and Road Initiative, it came right up to that point. The United States, the rhetoric in the news, if you can remember this, the rhetoric in the news was China's not doing enough to combat terrorism. They have a terrorism problem, and they're a part of the problem. So they're always trying to demonize China, seeing that China's rising economically, seeing that they're going to be a big, they're going to be a big economic competitor. They might even overtake the United States as being the number one economy. And this is, a lot of attempts to try to halt that, slow that, or even stop that. And so there was a lot of rhetoric against China of, you're not doing enough for the war on terror. And here we are fighting this battle. We've got Russia with us doing this. We're doing this. And what are you doing? You've got terrorists in your western part of your country, and you're not doing a damn thing about it. So that is what they were accusing China of at that point. It's like they're fueling the terrorism. They're putting the terrorists out there. It's their fault. And so we need to go after China because they're putting terrorists out there. So here's actually an article from Time magazine. Uyghur extremists joining ISIS poses a security and economic headache for China's Xi Jinping. This was in July of 2016. This is just one example. I'm just going to show you a couple of examples because now you fast forward to today and they say, no, these are just, they're just cracking down because they're genocidal maniacs who want to turn everybody into Han Chinese or something. I'm not really sure exactly what they think the motivation is, but here's another headline. Taliban removing Uyghur militants from Afghanistan's border with China. And this is from the, which organization is this one is from? This is from the Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. So Taliban removing Uyghur militants from Afghanistan's border with China. I think we have that. Yeah, there it is for you. So this is just another showcasing of this that, this actually was written recently. And again, posturing against China, the way they framed this was, oh my gosh, China's working with the Taliban. They're actually, because China says, well, if it's the government of Afghanistan, we're going to have to do it. We have to work with them. So they've been working with the Taliban, acknowledging them as the government of Afghanistan. And they've been saying to the Taliban, look, we got a lot of Uyghurs in the Taliban, and that's a problem for us. And so if you want us to recognize you, if you want us to do business with you, if you want us to treat you like a legitimate government, you're going to have to help us move those Taliban Uyghurs from the China border, like get them off of the border, put them more into Afghanistan, move them inland, but we don't want them at our border. We don't want them fighting us. And so they're working with the Taliban, and that is being used as, how dare the Chinese work with the Taliban? So they acknowledge that China has Uyghurs in the Taliban. They acknowledge this. They acknowledge that China's got this Uyghur problem in ISIS. They acknowledge that that Al-Qaeda, the Uyghur population, was one of the hottest places to actually recruit from, was the Uyghur population in China. All of that was acknowledged up until recently with the Belt and Road Initiative, and then it became, China is now cracking down on this innocent group of people, and how dare they? And that has been what they've said. So China had a problem. They had numerous terrorist attacks. These Uyghurs would come home from fighting with Al-Qaeda, come home from fighting with ISIS, and they would actually commit acts of terror inside of China. And they had a number of these attacks on just random civilians. At first, it was more targeted towards military or towards government, and then it started to just become random, and it was just random people in the middle of squares. They were just attacking civilians. And so China decided to take a really firm hand on how they were going to solve their jihadist extremist problem. So they had a problem similar to Israel in some ways, similar to the United States after we got attacked on 9/11. And the question is, how do you protect your people from terrorist attacks? How do you deal with these terrorists? You can't just ignore it. Although now that is what the United States is kind of saying to China, like, how dare you crack it? At first it was like, you got these terrorists, do something about it. And then China does something about it. And then they say, how dare you do something about this? Because the United States realizes that if China has a terrorist problem that they're dealing with inside their country, they can't expand economically. They can't do the Belt and Road Initiative if they're fighting terrorism on their border. It really is, that sucks up a bunch of resources. So now they're trying to get China to just let the terrorists go and let the jihadists go and let them start becoming a problem for China again. So you have to remember that this jihadist problem, China has it, the United States has it, right? The Middle East has it. Israel says Israel has it, right? So everyone's got this problem. So the question is, how do you solve this problem? Because again, you cannot ignore it. You have an obligation to keep your population safe. You have an obligation to do this. The question is, how are you going to do it? Now, we know how the U.S. does it, right? We waged war. We marched in and invaded Iraq. We went into Afghanistan. We bombed Syria relentlessly. We bomb, and we bomb. And we massacre hundreds of thousands of people in the process. We say, carpet bomb the place, level them. That has been our strategy. And it didn't work, right? I mean, how successful have we been with our war on terror? Now, Israel, the way that they've chosen to deal with and they do have a problem, right? They do have, there are some radicals that absolutely are obviously committing terrorist attacks, and they've got so they're worried about this. So what does Israel do? So Israel says, well, then we're going to take this group of people, the entire population of the people, and we are going to blockade them in Gaza. Put them in there, but then we're in control of all the resources. So it is like a prison. It's like they control the water, they control the ports, they control the airspace, they control everything. So they say put them in there and just give them the basic minimum in order to let them survive like a prison. Don't give them any more than that. We don't want them to flourish, because if they flourish and they get more resources, they get more money, they get more materials, they're going to commit acts of terror against us. So that's what they've dealt with, how they've dealt with Gaza. With the Palestinians in the West Bank, who are not Hamas, not run by Hamas, that's not their government over there, they've just occupied them. They say, well, then we're just going to have a real firm military presence. We're not going to let them travel around. We won't give them access to anywhere else in Israel, really, without our explicit permission, without us keeping a real strong eye on them. So we're just going to watch their every move, surveil them like crazy, and occupy them. And if they get in trouble, they face military courts. They don't face civilian courts like the rest of the Israelis do. It's like a pretty serious occupation. That's how they've chosen to deal with it. Now that they're at war with Hamas, they're choosing the American way, right? They're choosing to bomb. And, if civilians get killed, well, it's just casualties of war. That's just what it is. China decided to go an entirely different route with this. They did not wage war. They didn't use military warfare or occupation or bombing. You have not heard of anybody in the Xinjiang region being bombed. But what they did is, it's also questionable. And as Americans, we certainly, of course, can scrutinize and question. But the question that we're really exploring tonight is, what is the best way to deal with these jihadist terrorist movements that are a threat to civilians? China decided to, because they don't have the same freedoms in America that we have, they don't have the same constitution, they decided to make the religion illegal, basically. Not all of Islam. There's actually another area in China where there's a ton of Muslims, it's the second largest Muslim population in China, and they are not having any of these issues because they are not jihadists in any way. They've never radicalized in that part of China. So they have just banned the Salafist Wahhabi style Islam. So the Uyghurs can still practice Islam. They just can't practice Salafist. Now, Salafi, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, but the Salafi Islam certain aspects of it can, not always, most of the time it doesn't, but it can result in the jihad movement. That is how you get a jihadist, is that it's a branch of the Salafist ideology. One group of the Salafist ideology is non-political. Saudi Arabia was really the country that sort of gave birth to this Wahhabism, where they really promoted, because they were trying to maintain a monarchy. They really said, "Oh, it's a point of Islam, this Salafist ideology, for you to not be political. You don't want to participate in politics. You don't want to vote. You don't want anything like that." Which, of course, is what you'd want the narrative to be if you're trying to rule as a monarchy, right? So there's the majority of Salafists are in that sort of pacifist, we don't get political zone. Then there's another group that is more politically active. They want Sharia law. They want, they want that in their lives. They want more religion in their government. And then there's the third group, and it's a smaller group, but it is the jihadists, the ones that want to fight for this. They believe that not only should areas be ruled by Sharia law, but they believe that they should have to fight for it. They believe violence is the way to get there. Now, Salafism, or Salafi, I'm sorry if I'm saying it wrong, but that type of Islam is already a minority type of Islam. And then, it's like a fraction of Muslims actually practice that form of Islam. And then of that fraction, there's another fraction that are jihadists. So it's a fraction of a fraction. So this is a really small group, but they're violent, so they're scary. So China decided to make all of basically Salafi-style Islam illegal. If you showcase anything that looks like you are in that way, you're growing the beard, you're reading from, the imam is coming from a certain ideology that's practicing that mosque, they will shut that mosque down. So they basically made the religion illegal, aspects of the religion and any showcasing of the religion illegal. They then rounded a lot of them up. Yeah, they rounded a bunch of them up. I'm sure a lot of them were guilty, but I'm sure a lot of them weren't guilty. They were just believing a certain religion, and they rounded them up. They imprisoned them. And the ones that they thought, okay, I think they're fine, I think that they're not going to be a real problem, they then gave them vocational training. A lot of them, especially the women, they'd give them vocational training, and they'd move them to other parts of the country to kind of disperse the people with this ideology, to kind of, rather than allowing them to continue grouping, they moved them around the country, gave them a lot of opportunity and work. And that is how they did it. Meanwhile, they also built up their poor communities. They also stopped having the schools in the area just teach the Uyghur language. They said, you've got to learn Mandarin Chinese. We are a Chinese country. If you want opportunities in the rest of mainland China, you need to be able to speak, read, and write the language. And so they said, in the schools, you must be teaching Mandarin. You must be teaching the basics like math and science, and not just teaching religion and the Uyghur language. Like, we need to assimilate you into the country. So that's what they did. Al Jazeera did a piece on this, and in the piece, they said, is China changing its policy towards Uyghur Muslims? Because in the beginning, they mostly just rounded them up and put them in re-education camps, like prison camps, essentially, re-educating them. My grandfather, by the way, after the Vietnam War, was in one of these for 4 years. Not in China, but in Vietnam. It's kind of a thing that's done, and that was, he was in one of those in the 70s. But they go into these camps, and they're supposed to be re-educated, and they're trying to deprogram you or brainwash you into, thinking how the government thinks. So Al Jazeera writes this out as China changing its policy towards Uyghur Muslims. In this, they say that in the annual meeting with Parliament, Xi Jinping said, let the people, especially the young, have something to do and money to earn. So that was their way of dealing with it. They said, get those young people out, give them something to do, give them money to earn. That is how we're going to deal with it. Rather than them going and joining these jihadist groups, thinking that this gives them purpose in life, give them a different purpose in life. That's what they decided to do. China's urged private companies to invest in Xinjiang, and for the majority of Han Chinese population to mingle more with the Uyghurs. So they also encouraged a lot of immigration from the mainland Han Chinese population into the Uyghur population, and said, we need a mix. We need a mix. We need a mingle. They actually encouraged interracial, marriages, and they've done a lot to try to mix and mingle everybody in. So back to the idea of a genocide. Now, you might disagree, right? You might disagree with the way China has decided to deal with this, but rather than bombing, rather than occupying, rather than blockading, they're saying, okay, we just got to take the ideology out of them, give them a bunch of opportunity, intermix them with all the people, and we'll see what happens. It has seemed to work. And also, there are still a lot of people in prison in China. There are still a lot of these Uyghurs who have remained in prison, and China says because they won't change their ideology, and we can't let them out. And it's against the law in our society. So they're not treated. So the Palestinians, you have to remember, they're treated differently because they're not under the Constitution or the basic laws of Israel. So they're under military law. So if they do something wrong, they face a whole different legal structure that really runs, military law can change whenever it just feels like changing, unlike an actual constitution or actual basic laws. These Uyghurs in China are actually under the laws of China. So they are still treated to the same laws and the same rights that any other Chinese citizen would be given if they were incarcerated. So in China, they said, we have just made this religion illegal. Now, you could disagree with that, of course, but that's what they decided to do. We made it illegal. They practiced the religion. They committed the crime. So now they're in prison. They won't change. They've told us they're not going to change. We don't think that they've really, truly changed their ideology. So we're keeping them here. You might disagree with that. That is fine. That is just the way that they're dealing with their jihadist issue. Now, one way that I want to prove this is all the Muslim nations, none of them have condemned China on how they're going about this jihadist problem. And a lot of people then say, well, that is because they're bought off. There was actually Imran Khan had made numerous statements saying, I don't disagree with the way China's doing it. China's doing what China should do. This is the right way to go about de-radicalizing people. And everybody accused Imran Khan of being bought off by the Chinese because China had done a lot of business with Pakistan, got them out of a lot of financial trouble. And so they're saying, well, because China's going around doing these business deals with these countries don't want to talk bad about China because they want to stay on their good side because of these business deals. Fair enough, fine. But take a look at this. This is from the, I don't think you'll be able to see this, but this is just from the Foreign Policy Research Institute. So this is like, they're going after China saying, well, China's, they're definitely committing all these human rights abuses. Here's one section from that. They said Muslims in general and Muslim states in particular have shown little interest in the plight of the Uyghurs. But one would have expected the jihadis. So this is where it gets interesting. Because maybe you could say, well, they bought off the governments because they're doing all these business deals. But what about the jihadis? So one would expect the jihadis, with their emphasis on helping Muslims under duress wherever they are, to show greater interest in events in Xinjiang. Surprisingly, despite an ideology that requires attention to the Muslim Uyghurs and the potential to score points in Muslim public opinion worldwide, jihadis have been largely quiet about the Chinese concentration camps and brutal repression of fellow Muslims. Back when Myanmar authorities were massacring the Rohingya jihadis, at least sought to use the atrocities to rhetorically promote their agenda, even as they did nothing to actually stop the anti-Muslim violence. But in the case of the Uyghurs, we see even less rhetoric, let alone action. So they're saying the one group that would speak up, the one group that always speaks up, the one group that speaks up against any sort of abuse against any Muslim group, you see them, the jihadis saying, oh, the Palestinians, oh, you've got like groups that are considered terrorist organizations, and they're always coming to the plight of Muslims anywhere who are made, or at least just the rhetoric, like the Rohingyas. They would say, hey, you're committing human rights abuses against the Rohingyas. How dare you? We must fight. We must help. But they didn't. But they at least said something. Even the jihadis aren't saying anything about what is going on in China. So that right there has got to make you think, then is there anything going on in China? Because they certainly haven't bought off the jihadists. I suppose maybe, but anything's possible. But these groups thrive on, and their whole ethos is helping downtrodden Muslims who are being abused. That is how these groups sustain. That is how they recruit. That is how people continue to believe in them and want to live in their caliphates. That's how that continues. So they would, of course, exploit, if there was something going on in the Xinjiang region against the Uyghurs, they would exploit that and they would use that for their narratives, but they're not. So maybe the reason why they're not is because maybe that's not exactly what is going on. In fact, AP News did an investigation on the ground. This came out just a couple of years ago, or maybe even last year. In fact, I want to say, I remember when this came out almost. Let me, because when I was co-hosting Rising on the Hill, and I was sitting there with my two co-hosts, and I mentioned the Uyghurs, and I said, well, there's not really a genocide going on with the Uyghurs. We haven't seen any evidence of this. And my co-hosts were both appalled, both from the left and the right, appalled, and basically called me a Holocaust denier. And then literally the very next day, this piece comes out from AP where they're like, well, the razor wire that once ringed public buildings in China's far northwest Xinjiang region is nearly all gone. Gone, too, are the middle school uniforms in military camouflage and the armored personal carriers rumbling around the homeland of the Uyghurs, because they had a lot of military presence there looking, or police presence looking for potential jihadists. Gone are many of the surveillance cameras that once glared down like birds from overhead poles and the eerie eternal wail of sirens in the ancient Silk Road city of Kashgar. Uyghur teen boys, once a rare sight, now flirt with girls over pounding dance music at rollerblading rinks. Because the real staunch jihadist movement, they don't do that. They're not allowed to mix with the women. They can't go and dance. They can't listen to that music. They can't go rollerblading and flirt with girls. One cab driver blasted Shakira as she raced through the streets 4 years after Beijing launched a brutal crackdown that swept up to 1 million or more Uyghurs, which has never been proven, that number. We don't know. They just said, here's buildings and there's 1 million people in there, we swear. They said its control of Xinjiang has entered a new era. Chinese authorities have scaled back many of the most draconian and visible aspects of the region's high-tech police state. The panic that gripped the region a few years ago because of the terrorism attacks and also the rounding up of people has subsided considerably, and a sense of normality is creeping back in. But there is no doubt about who rules, and the evidence of the terror of the last 4 years is everywhere. So this piece, they tried to couch it. They were like, well, there was this real bad terrorism. We know it. There was this real bad, the real bad genocide going on. We know this. But, and there's just semblance of the evidence. But now all that's gone and everything's normal. Okay, so let's say they did do this. Let's say they did have this. And by the way, also the other thing that keeps happening is the narrative continues to change. So it went from, it's a genocide. They're killing off the Muslim people. They're rounding them up. They're putting them in these prison camps, and God knows if we'll ever see them again. Then when there was no evidence of this, you didn't see mass, in a Holocaust like that, in a genocide like that, you're going to see, like the Rohingyas, you're going to see hordes of people running to the border. You're going to see people getting the hell out of there. That's just how that happens. People aren't going to sit around and wait to be rounded up and massacred. They are going to try to get out with their lives. And we didn't see that ever. Not once did we see that. So then the narrative had to change, and they said, okay, well, it wasn't actually a genocide like that. It was a cultural genocide. And this is where this new term comes in. Cultural genocide. They're erasing their culture. They're erasing their language, their culture. Even though the language is everywhere on all the signs, it's double. It's Mandarin and the Uyghur language everywhere they go. But they were saying it was a cultural genocide. I agree with this, I suppose, in a way, in that China absolutely eradicated the Salafist jihadi culture, or even just the Salafist culture that could lead to jihadi. They certainly absolutely did crack down on that, and they erased that. They said, you will not be allowed to study a religion that will lead you to extremism. We have banned this in this country, and if you showcase it, if there's any sort of inkling that we think you might be practicing that religion that is now banned in this country, we're putting you in jail. You cannot do that. We will root this out. And that is how they chose to do it. And then according to this AP, and according to many of the American businesses that are operating in Xinjiang, but you've got a lot of people saying, you shouldn't be there. You should get out of there. How dare you operate factories in the Xinjiang region? Like, how dare you give these people who were oppressed and poor jobs and prosperity and the ability to make money? How dare you do that? Get out of there. Get out of there. Leave those people poor. Give them no opportunities. That's basically what a person is saying when they say, we want you to boycott the Xinjiang region. We want you to boycott goods coming out of this region. We want you to boycott setting up businesses in this region. All you're doing is hurting the people who live there. That's all you're doing. You're not actually harming anybody but them. You're making it worse, so it's a bad idea. That's why sanctions are a bad idea. So this is how China chose to do it. And clearly, apparently, it worked, I guess. AP is saying, well, there was a genocide going on here, but now everything looks okay. There's no barbed wire. Kids are laughing and rollerblading, but there was this horrible genocide here. Okay, so and also I want to show you this, the State Department, they kept trying to say there's a genocide after Mike Pompeo was saying there's a genocide. And Trump's administration said there was a genocide. The Biden administration has affirmed this, so they're in agreement. But here's State Department lawyers conclude insufficient evidence to prove genocide in China. They say, we swear there's one going on. We don't have any evidence of it, but we swear it's happening. We know it's happening, but we don't have any evidence. Okay. So this leads me to, look, it maybe worked. And maybe this is an option for other places that are looking to root out terrorism. Maybe rather than bomb, kill, bury under rubble, blockade, occupy, make people miserable. Maybe there's a different way. And maybe China figured it out. And maybe our governments don't want to admit that. That's a real possibility. And if that's the case, then that is a crime. It is an absolute crime. If they figured it out and they were able to root out jihadism in their culture, if they were able to do it in a humane way that didn't cause the loss of children's lives buried under rubble, maybe that is a way we should be looking into. Now, you could disagree with China's methods. I certainly wrestle with it because I like remaining consistent in my views, and I believe in freedom of religion. but I'm also privileged, and I don't live near a growing caliphate. I also believe in not imprisoning people unless they've committed an actual crime. And although China did criminalize behaviors and beliefs, and so they technically could incarcerate these people and said, well, you broke the law. I have an issue with it because I'm a freedom-loving American. But I also can understand the value in assimilating people. Sweden made certain Islamic customs illegal in an effort to assimilate the immigrants that they brought into their country. And I know it is tough to know where to draw the line, but I think these are the types of debates and discussions we should be having in our Western democracies, rather than debating whether or not it's moral when to bomb terrorists and whether or not those bombs kill kids. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining the show tonight. Really appreciate you being here. We will be back with another great show tomorrow night. We're going to be talking to Dr. Shiva Ayyadurai. He's back on the show tomorrow. He's got a lot to say. He's running for president, and we will be chatting with him tomorrow night. So be sure to check that show out, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. You guys are awesome. Thank you for being here. If you want to contact me, if you want to tell me, Kim, you're wrong, or Kim, you're right, or Kim, I got a great guest or a great topic idea, I love hearing from you. Kim@KimIverson.com is how you can reach me. Otherwise, guys, we will see you tomorrow night. Have a good one. Bye-bye.